So today, I want to talk about one of the most important aspects of martial arts training. But first, let's get out of the city. Well, that's going to be there till spring. So here we are at the Grapple Arts cabin. My cabin, my getaway. It's kind of like my bat cave, my sanctum sanctorum, and my fortress of solitude. It's a cool place. I come here to unwind once in a while. It's out in the middle of the woods. There's no power. There's no electricity. It's fantastic. But what I really want to talk about today is why we train jiu-jitsu and why we train martial arts in general. I mean, it's a little bit strange for people to spend that much time wearing pajamas, rolling around on the ground together. I mean, if it's all about self-defense, there are easier ways to achieve your self-defense objectives. Carrying a gun would be the number one solution. Buy a gun, spend a little bit of time learning how to use it, carry it, refresh yourself at the range, and you save a whole lot of time. You don't have to go to class 3 or 4 times a week and spend 2 hours there, plus the physiotherapy when you injure yourself, plus the trying to eat right and all that. There's much easier ways to achieve your self-defense goals. It's also not about fitness, really. If you want fitness, you could do fitness in much smaller chunks, much more time effectively. Instead of going to class for 3 or 4 times a week for 2 hours at a time, plus driving there, you could go for a run. You could lift weights. In half an hour in the gym, if you hit it really hard, you can achieve a hell of a lot from a fitness perspective, and you don't have to spend all this extra time. So why do we do something as hard as martial arts training, as hard as jiu-jitsu, as hard as something where your ego is continuously being tested, and just as you think you've got it, along comes somebody and they grind you into a pulp on the mat, and you go, man, jiu-jitsu's stupid, I hate training, I've done all this work, and now my guard got passed by some 250-pound white belt, I hate jiu-jitsu, I'm burning my gi. So that's hard, but that's exactly why we train. We don't train because it's easy, we train because it's hard. And the major milestones of your martial arts career, going to your very first class, walking in through the doors, going into a new school, which is intimidating for everybody, because you don't know if they're going to rip your head off, or if they're going to attack you with knives when you go in there. Oh, look, it's a new victim, let's attack him. You don't know that. So going through those doors, that's a milestone. Going to your first class, that's an important milestone. Competing for the first time, that's a big progression. Getting your first promotion, getting your black belt. These are achievable milestones. And they're really important because we've lost most of the rites of passage that they used to have in traditional societies. So back in the day, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, some primitive societies today, they had rites of passage that you had to go through in order to become an adult, to go from childhood to become an adult. And they were different, mostly, for men and for women, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the bottom line is, these were difficult things. They weren't gimmies. They were difficult things where there was a very real chance of failure, and they were physically difficult, and ultimately, there was no guarantee that you were going to actually succeed. Now, honestly, for women, probably in most societies, the rite of passage was having a kid. Having a child in primitive societies, you're not guaranteed that it's going to be okay. It's certainly going to be painful, and it's not going to be easy. And you might die. And the child might die. Having a child is an inherent rite of passage for a woman. Now, I'm not saying that in today's society, if you're a woman, you have to have a child to become a real woman, because there are other options. But historically, that's probably true. For men in traditional societies, there were many different rituals that men had to go through. And I'm not an anthropologist, but even just with my casual reading of the topic, it's totally obvious. Many Native American societies had some kind of dream quest where the person had to leave the village, leave the town, leave the tribe, and go out by himself for a long period of time. This, you were at the mercy of getting eaten by a wild animal, of starving, of dying by exposure, of other tribes catching you and doing terrible things to you. So it wasn't safe. But that was the point. You went and you did something really difficult. And it wasn't just in native societies. Think of the movie 300, when young King Leonidas basically got pitched out of the village and had to fend for himself to become a man. There's that awesome showdown between him and the wolf. And that metaphorically is the difficulty of that period. Well, that's somewhat historically accurate. We're told that young Spartan men were kicked out of the village and were hunted by other Spartans and had to live off the land. And they could do certain crimes during that time to survive, and they had to do that. That was a difficult thing. They could get hurt or killed, and it wasn't a guarantee that they would survive. And even not that long ago, in the British Royal Navy, when sailors crossed the equator for the first time, there was a rite of passage. You didn't get off easy. You got beaten with wet ropes. You got flogged with wet ropes. And I'm sure some of those people ended up under the care of the ship's surgeon. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't fun. But it was difficult. And because it was difficult, and because you passed that test, you then became a real sailor. You then became a man in that society. So, I'm not saying that you should have to go live off the land and spear wolves with a stick the way Leonidas did, or that you should go and live on a mountaintop somewhere for a week or two till you have your dream vision, or that we come over and we beat you with wet ropes. But when you think of it, martial arts is kind of a crucible in that same way. You're sitting there, you're at a tournament, you don't know if you're going to win or lose. You could get injured. You're sitting there for hours, you're getting super nervous, then you go and you do it. Maybe it's successful, maybe it's not successful. It doesn't really matter. The point is that you went out there, you put it on the line, there was a chance of injury, there was no guarantee of success, you probably feel like you could die. The reality is you're not going to die, but you feel like you might die. And if you come through that process, you're a different person. All of a sudden, public speaking doesn't seem so terrifying anymore when you've gone out there and publicly fought in front of hundreds of people, all your teammates, and there's a person who's really trying to choke you unconscious, and you're really trying to choke them unconscious. After you've gone through something like that, and publicly put it on the line in front of everybody, then things like going and talking at the insurance corporation dealers meeting of the year. There is no insurance corporation dealers meeting of the year, but going and giving a public presentation in front of 10 other people with your PowerPoint slides doesn't seem nearly as threatening. You've undergone a transformation. And I know for me, martial arts, doing martial arts since I was 12, has been really, really instrumental, because you face your fears and you face failure again and again and again. So in judo, in jiu-jitsu, in other sports, going out there, publicly putting it on the line, and coming away. Sometimes I got injured, sometimes I didn't get injured, sometimes I won, sometimes I didn't win, but it was always difficult, and it really, really helped put things in perspective. I became a different person at the end of that than I was at the beginning of that. Similarly, at the end of my undergraduate, I decided to I spent an afternoon in a map library, which for me is a super dangerous place to be. So I started looking at a lake that I had always wanted to go visit. And I was like, how would I get to this lake? Where would I go from this lake? And a couple hours later, I pieced together a 2,800 kilometer, it's about 1,800 mile journey across northern Canada that seemed like a good idea at the time. A summer later, I was doing that trip. So it took me 82 days to paddle from Jasper, Alberta to Churchill, Manitoba. And during that time, again, there's a potential for failure, there's a potential for bleeding and potentially dying, and it's difficult. And it's binary. You either succeed or you don't. You go through that process or you don't. And I'd done all the prerequisite homework, I'd done the training, I'd done the research, learned to paddle, I'd learned to camp, I'd learned to canoe. That was all good. But putting it together in a big package like that, that was my own sort of self-imposed test. Now, I'm not saying martial arts is the only way to get these rites of passage, but they're pretty good. It's a pretty good way of getting this rite of passage. So regardless of whether you ever put on a gi in your whole life, regardless if you ever go and really try and choke somebody as they're really trying to choke you, which is an activity I highly encourage, but of course I'm biased, I think it's really important that everybody find some kind of difficult thing, some kind of thing that they don't feel comfortable doing, something that's physical, something that involves the risk of injury, something that has the possibility of failure. And if it's public, so much the better. And that will really help readjust your perspective on what's scary, what's achievable. In essence, you're creating your own rite of passage, which, as I pointed out at the beginning, is something that we don't have in this society, really. It's all part of growing as a human being. You're growing physically, you're growing mentally, you're growing emotionally, you're growing spiritually. You're becoming a better version of you by doing hard things. It's like lifting weights, right? You're X strong, you go to the gym and you lift weights, a couple days later, you're X+1 strong. You are improving. You can do this not just with your muscles, but with all of your muscles, including your brain muscles. Right? You can improve yourself as a human being. So ultimately, that is the real reason to train. Yes, self-defense is important. Absolutely. Yes, fitness and health are important. Absolutely. Yes, the social component of training, going and hanging out with your friends and trying to rip each other's heads off, that's important too. But the real reason for training is because it's hard. And if you train, that's awesome. Good for you.